Absolutely not. This is unacceptable. Professor Zor hissed, his mandibles clicking in frustration. He waved the data slate in one of his 3 grasping limbs, his segmented body stiff with irritation. You must be joking, he snapped, or you're violating the academic integrity of the Galactic Academy. Across the desk, the human, designation, Matthew Cole, origin, Earth, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. I don't see the problem, he said casually. You assigned the work. I did it. Zor's compound eyes flicked to the timestamp. In 5 minutes, he demanded. Matthew nodded. That's right. The professor's secondary eyelids twitched, a clear sign of disbelief among the Karowe species. He exhaled through his spiracles and tapped at the slate, pulling up one of the complex astrophysics equations. It should have taken a top-performing student at least a week to complete. Considering the research, calculations, and countless cross-references to existing galactic models, even Zor himself, an expert in the field, would have needed 2 full days to review it. Yet, the answer was there. All calculations correct. Every proof airtight. You must have cheated, Zor concluded. Access restricted databases. Use unauthorized computational devices. Or, Matthew tapped his temple. Or I just figured it out. The professor scuttled to his terminal, his limbs moving furiously. The Academy enforced strict academic standards. Any violation would result in immediate disciplinary action. Go ahead, Matthew said. Run all the checks you want. Zor did exactly that. The system scanned for signs of automation, plagiarism, or external assistance. The results were undeniable. All original. All correct. This was impossible. No species in the Galactic Academy had ever demonstrated such raw intellectual processing in such a short time. The Karowe, who prided themselves on precision and logic, needed full days to work through these equations. The Durat required advanced computational augmentations just to keep up. The Zari wouldn't even attempt it without a think tank assisting them. And yet, this human sat before him, completely unfazed. Zor set the slate down. Explain. Matthew stretched, his movements unervingly casual. Well, he said, first, I noticed half the equations could be simplified with an alternate set of base assumptions. The Academy sticks with third-gen Marvian field theory for predictive modeling, but it's full of redundancies. So, I adjusted for that. Zor blinked. That shouldn't have been possible. Continue. Once that was sorted, the rest was just numerical pattern recognition. Your equations assume an artificial constraint between field fluctuations and observable cosmic drift. But that's just a byproduct of old data smoothing techniques. I ignored that and got the actual values. The professor stared. You ignored fundamental Academy models? They're not fundamental, Matthew corrected. They're just old. Zor clicked his mandibles. And you reached these conclusions in 5 minutes. Matthew shrugged. I had a pen and paper. The professor almost dropped the slate. Pen and paper? He leaned forward. Humans do not possess advanced cognitive lattice structures. You lack neural synchronization matrices. Your species has no documented cases of quantum memory imprinting. And yet, you expect me to believe you solved a week's worth of advanced astrophysics in 5 minutes using, he could barely bring himself to say it, a primitive writing tool? Hey, don't knock it, Matthew said with a grin. Worked, didn't it? Zor's appendages twitched in deep contemplation. This was new, completely unprecedented. The Galactic Academy had evaluated species for over 3 centuries. They had studied the finest minds across multiple civilizations, but they had never seen anything like this. What? Zor asked slowly, replaying the conversation in his mind. Are humans? Matthew grinned. Wouldn't you like to know? Zor's appendages twitched again. The Academy had encountered countless civilizations, each bringing unique skills. But humans had never stood out until now. You are suggesting, Zor said carefully, that the Academy's methodologies are inefficient. Matthew tilted his head. I'm suggesting they're outdated. There's a difference. Zor's compound eyes flicked toward the data slate again. The calculations were flawless. But it wasn't just speed that troubled him. It was the efficiency. Matthew hadn't simply solved the problems. He had rewritten the framework itself. If his approach was valid, then entire sections of galactic astrophysics would need to be revised. Unacceptable. Explain this method, Zor demanded. Line by line. Matthew sighed but pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket, its edges slightly crumpled. Zor's spiracles flared. Paper, a rarity in the Academy, where all information was digitized. Yet here was this human holding a flimsy sheet of compressed plant fibers. Matthew unfolded it. See, the problem is, you guys brute force solutions with calculation-heavy models. Makes sense if you're a species relying on neural enhancements. But humans, he tapped the page. We think differently. Different how? Pattern recognition, Matthew explained. Instead of crunching numbers a long way, I spotted the relationships between values and solved the problem in fewer steps. That's what your models don't account for. Efficiency of thought. Zor's limbs froze. The Academy's most advanced species had entire subroutines dedicated to predictive analytics. Yet this human was claiming his mind could identify solutions faster than a system designed for interstellar-scale calculations. The professor's voice clicked with skepticism. And you expect me to believe this is an inherent trait among humans? Well, yeah, Matthew said. It's not just me. Back on Earth, we do this all the time. We call it mental shortcuts. Helps with survival. When your ancestors spend generations figuring out how to throw rocks better than the other guy, you start noticing patterns real fast. Zor was beginning to understand the implications. This wasn't just a single anomaly. If Matthew was right, then humanity's entire approach to intelligence was radically different from the rest of the Academy. They weren't just solving problems. They were circumventing them. Zor activated his terminal, calling up the Academy's central database. Humans are classified as a Category 2 intellect species, he read aloud, ranked below the Karui and Durit due to their lack of direct neural augmentation. Yeah, I saw that ranking, Matthew said. Bit insulting. Your species' academic performance has historically been unremarkable. Matthew smirked. That's 'cause you test the wrong things. Zor hesitated. Elaborate. You value depth of computation, Matthew said. Accuracy. Precision. How well you stick to established methods. But humans, we solve problems with whatever works. Even if it means rewriting the rules as we go. Zor reviewed past human performance in the database. Most human students had, at best, maintained average scores. But now that he looked closer, there were anomalies. Cases where human students had excelled at open-ended tasks, but struggled with strict computational exercises. Adaptability over precision. Ingenuity over repetition. Zor looked back at Matthew, who was idly spinning a stylus between his fingers, completely at ease. The professor's mandibles clicked in quiet realization. Are you saying, Zor asked, that humans have been at a disadvantage in our system this entire time? Matthew shrugged. That's one way to put it. But if you give a human a problem with no restrictions, no approved method, that's when we shine. Zor's appendages flexed in thought. The Academy had never accounted for a species that valued speed and adaptability over structured learning. And now, they might have to. If this claim is true, then human intelligence has been vastly underestimated, Zeeler said. And that can only mean one thing. The Academy has been wrong. Matthew smiled and grabbed the data slate. All right, let's break another one of your models, Professor. Zor's mandibles clicked as he reviewed the numbers again. The human had solved a complex gravitational variance equation in mere minutes. An equation that had taken the brightest minds in the Galactic Academy decades to refine. And not only had he solved it, he had corrected it. Matthew stretched his arms out. So, do I get a gold star or something? Zor didn't respond. He was too absorbed in cross-referencing the results with the Academy's central astrophysical databases. He ran simulations, checked historical predictive models, and tested gravitational field projections. The numbers matched Matthew's claim. For over a century, the Academy's maps had been slightly off by 4.3%. At first, that margin seemed small, almost insignificant, but Zohr knew better. A 4.3% miscalculation meant planetary alignments had been projected inaccurately. Starships had been making jumps through space with slightly incorrect trajectories. Long-term astrophysical studies, which determined habitable zones, planetary stability, and cosmic drift, had been subtly flawed. Zohr exhaled sharply through his spiracles. This is highly concerning. Matthew tilted his head. Why, you've got the right numbers now. You don't understand, Zohr said. This isn't just an error in an equation. This is an error that has shaped how we navigate the cosmos. If your method is correct, it means every major scientific body in the galaxy has been making subtle miscalculations for generations. Matthew scratched his chin. Yeah, sounds bad, but better to fix it now, right? Zohr's limbs twitched with agitation. It's not that simple. The Academy does not easily accept foundational changes. It could take years, maybe centuries, for such a correction to be acknowledged. Entire institutions rely on the accuracy of these calculations. If we announce that they were wrong, it will be seen as an attack on the credibility of the Academy itself. Matthew frowned. That's stupid. Zohr's eyes darkened. It's how things function. Doesn't mean it's right. The professor clenched his lower limbs, his mind struggling to process the implications. He had spent his entire life upholding the rigorous standards of the Galactic Academy. He had dismissed species that failed to meet those standards, judged civilizations based on their ability to conform. But now a human, a species he had once deemed unremarkable, had rewritten astrophysical theory in minutes, using nothing more than a piece of paper and a pencil. Everything about it felt wrong, but the numbers didn't lie. Zohr rubbed his upper limbs together, deep in thought. If I bring this to the Academy's higher councils, they will demand extensive review. They might even suppress the findings to avoid admitting fault. Matthew sighed. That's kind of what I expected. Bureaucracy, right? Zohr's mandibles twitched. Humans do not handle bureaucracy well. We handle it, Matthew said. We just tend to get really impatient with it. If someone's wrong, we don't politely wait for them to correct themselves in a few centuries. We just do it ourselves. Zohr observed the human carefully. He had studied dozens of species, analyzed their thought patterns, and categorized their approaches to problem-solving. The Karawi favored slow, meticulous logic. The Dirac used multi-tiered computational models to verify every conclusion. But humans just fix things without waiting, without asking for permission, without considering whether it was their place to do so. Zohr's spiracles tightened. Are you saying you intend to circumvent the Academy? Matthew shrugged. If they won't listen, yeah. What's stopping me from just publishing this myself? The professor's appendages twitched involuntarily. You would openly defy the most respected scientific institution in the galaxy? Matthew smirked. If they're wrong, absolutely. Zohr was silent for a long moment. Most species fear the Academy. A challenge to its authority meant political consequences, academic exile, and possibly even planetary sanctions if the defiance was severe enough. But Matthew wasn't intimidated. He didn't care about the system. He only cared about fixing the problem. Zohr's mind raced through possibilities. If Matthew published the findings himself, the Academy would retaliate. They would attempt to discredit him and his work, labeling it unverified. If a single human student were behind it, they might even dismiss it entirely. But if Zohr were involved, if a respected professor with decades of tenure stood behind these findings, it would be different. It would be a serious risk. But what was the alternative? Continue knowing the Academy was wrong. Continue enforcing those errors. Zohr's compound eyes focused on Matthew again. He had misjudged the species, their intelligence, and their approach to knowledge. No, it wasn't just him. The entire academy had misjudged them. For the first time in his career, Zor was considering breaking the rules. Slowly, he set the data slate down. If we are to challenge the academy's findings, we will need additional verification. Your calculations must be replicated, reviewed, and tested under multiple conditions. Matthew crossed his arms. Fine, but we're not waiting centuries for some council to approve it. Zor hesitated before exhaling slowly. Agreed, a human and a Karoe professor, working together to correct the greatest scientific institution in the galaxy. Zor had never imagined himself in such a position. But then again, he had never imagined humans could do what they had just done, and that perhaps was the most important discovery of all.